Revenge with Karen.
I knew something was off the minute Dylan swaggered into the conference room with a cold brew in one hand and a $600 hoodie draped over his shoulders like a cape. He was 28 going on 16, with that startup bro energy that smelled like Axe body spray and unearned confidence. The CEO clapped him on the back and grinned like a proud dad at a middle school science fair. Everyone, this is my son, Dylan, be co-leading the AI rollout with Sara. I didn't say a word, just nodded and took a long sip of the lukewarm coffee I'd been nursing since 7 a.m. I'd spent the last 11 months in the digital trenches building that tool, mapping data flows, structuring client risk trees, debugging hellish edge cases at 2 a.m., while Dylan was probably vaping through a Twitch stream. It made the interface intuitive enough for a drunk ferret to use and secure enough to meet enterprise compliance without raising flags. And now here he was, strutting in with a fake tan and a TikTok following, ready to lead. Truth is, I wasn't even angry. Not yet. I'd seen this before. Golden boy nepotism dressed up as innovation. Airdrop a legacy hire onto a project 2 weeks before launch, slap their name on the slide deck, and boom, visionary leadership. It's corporate theater, and I'd been in the cheap seats long enough to know the script. So I smiled, quietly, and got back to work. Oh, and while we're on it, if you've made it this far and haven't subscribed yet, I'm gonna need you to fix that. 95% of people listening right now aren't subscribed, and it takes 2 seconds to hit that little button. Plus, it seriously motivates the team to keep digging up stories like this. So smash that like, tap subscribe. Let's get back to this disaster in progress. Now, Dylan's first big idea was to rename the product WAV AI. Yeah, like Wave, but with an AI at the end, because we're riding the data wave, bro. He wanted surfboard-themed dashboards. I wish I was kidding. He pulled me into a breakout room to jam on the vibe and suggested we add emojis to the notification system. Said it would humanize the pipeline. I told him that would break 2 of our core SOC2 conditions. He blinked like I'd spoken another language and said, well, can we just ask legal to chill? I kept the poker face. It's a skill. You either master it or lose your mind. I played dumb, nodded along, and quietly rolled back every reckless change he made once he left for his sound bath. Meanwhile, the CEO paraded him around like a golden retriever who just learned to sit. Dylan's really putting his stamp on this project. He told the board during one of our weekly status calls, while I sat there, muted, staring at the ceiling, and wondering if I could fake a Zoom crash. Behind the scenes, I was doing the real work. Rebuilding corrupted model outputs after Dylan tried to clean up the code by deleting entire folders. Repairing the client intake system after he demanded a UI redesign based on a Tinder clone he liked. My days were a loop of damage control, mediation, and caffeine. But I kept everything moving because that's what I do. I fix things. I make sure the plane lands even after some trust fund clown tries to fly it with a fidget spinner. But the thing about being invisible is, it makes people forget you built the plane in the first place. That forgetfulness started to spread. HR stopped replying to my payroll inquiries. Few devs I mentored were suddenly reporting to Dylan. My name disappeared from the roadmap. The CTO, who once said I was mission critical, started calling me logistics support. And every time I brought up compliance or security risk, Dylan would roll his eyes and say, Sara, you worry too much. We've got to take risks to scale. So I did. Just not the kind he meant. I made some quiet changes. Tucked into the documentation, under a very boring-sounding section called External License Protocols, I updated the certifier metadata to reflect my title, Primary Data Certifier. Legal had approved that title months ago. No one questioned it. And along with it, I added a very simple line. All third-party transfers of proprietary architecture require final certification from the Primary Data Certifier. I didn't even have to sneak it in. It was all above board, clean, legal, just invisible enough for people like Dylan to miss until they needed it. And they would need it. Because I knew this house of cards was one yoga-brained idea away from collapse. So I waited. And while Dylan played CEO cosplay, I built the trap. It started with the fonts. I swear to God, fonts. Dylan burst into the Monday sync like he was storming the beaches of Normandy, firing off buzzwords and waving around a Canva mock-up like it was the Rosetta Stone. We need to ditch the corporate vibe, he said, snapping his fingers at the screen. Think nostalgic futurism, Sara. Like Y2K meets Burning Man, but for hedge funds. I blinked twice, long and slow, and said, "So Helvetica's out?" He grinned. "Exactly. Helvetica screams baggage. We're pivoting to Pixel Rebel. It's a beta font from this guy in Iceland who codes inside ice caves. This would have been funny if we weren't already 6 weeks from launch and locked into a contract that required UI accessibility compliance for federal clients. But Dylan didn't care about that. Compliance, deadlines, performance metrics, they were all just background noise to him. What mattered was disruption, she interpreted as throwing spaghetti at the wall and firing whoever complained about the mess. That's when the real hemorrhaging started. He authorized a complete UI overhaul, scrapped the stable framework I'd built, and demanded we integrate a neuroresponsive interface, which, in English, meant swapping reliable drop-downs for hover-activated blob animations that broke on 60% of browsers. Then came the external vendors, started signing checks to a West Coast branding lab that charged $18,000 to reconceptualize the onboarding vibe. Another $60K went to a UX sound designer who composed startup chimes meant to invoke the warmth of childhood, but with AI undertones. Meanwhile, the dev team was quietly panicking. The backend was buckling under the weight of every Frankenstein addition Dylan forced in. Bug reports multiplied. One junior engineer nearly quit after Dylan insisted we swap out the database structure because it feels too hierarchical, you know? I pulled him aside and begged him not to leave. Promised I'd shield him. I'd been here before. I could patch things, duct tape the seams, keep it all afloat if I had just a little time. That's when I made the move. I didn't scream, didn't march into the CEO's office, didn't slap a folder on the table like some TV lawyer. No, I did what every woman in tech learns to do after surviving enough boy wonders with inherited titles. I built my parachute in silence. See, buried in the compliance architecture of the system was a permission tier no one ever looked at. Data certifier. It sounded dry, almost bureaucratic. The kind of thing you'd skip right past on a security diagram. Months earlier, Eagle had asked for a role to act as final sign-off for any data export or platform replication. I had volunteered, quietly, got it documented, role assigned, credentials issued, buried in plain sight. Now, while Dylan blew 6 figures on pastel gradients and neurotic typography, I was locking the system's most sensitive modules behind my sign-off. Source IP, bound. Client-side encryption keys, check. Replication protocols, all filtered through data certifier credentials, mine, not to block the project, not to sabotage it, just to make sure if someone tried to steal the bones of it later, they'd need to go through me first. No one noticed. Of course they didn't. Dylan was too busy rehearsing his launch pitch with an improv coach. The CEO was off golfing with a pharma exec who called his son visionary. Meanwhile, I cleaned up behind the scenes like the invisible janitor of their fever dream. I rerouted infrastructure dependencies, documented every single pipeline I touched, and backed up the original build to a cloud repository no one else had access to. Not out of spite, out of insurance. Because I could feel it coming. That itch at the back of the neck. The shift in hallway glances. The unanswered pings. Dylan had started referring to me in meetings as legacy ops. Smile while saying it like it was a compliment. It wasn't. I was being framed as the old codebase, useful during beta, but disposable now that the real creatives were on board. So I hardened the exits. The clause I drafted wasn't poetic. No soaring language. Just 10 lines of dry protocol in our export policy. It said that in order for proprietary architecture to be transferred, duplicated, or licensed to any third party, had to be final approval from the primary data certifier, with timestamp and credential key. And if no such certification was granted, then all transfer scripts would auto-fail. Every single one. I'd built a deadman switch and handed myself the trigger. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I finally knew what it felt like to be standing in a burning building with the matches still warm in someone else's hand and no one planning to call the fire department. First sign was stupid small. Stupid in the way a stubbed toe is small, until it throbs with the kind of pain that makes you reconsider every life choice that led to walking barefoot near furniture. I couldn't access the analytics dashboard. At first, I figured it was just a permissions hiccup. Glitch in the role-based access model. Happens. I filed a ticket with IT. Got a canned reply. Please contact your supervisor for elevated access approvals. That was weird. It was the supervisor. I shrugged it off. People make mistakes. Except then I tried to pull up the sprint calendar. Gone. Then the integration logs. Gone. Then the dev chat. Poof. Like I'd never been there. Like I'd never touched a line of the system. I called Karen from legal, the only person left who treated me like I existed. She sounded nervous, asked if I'd gotten the org realignment notice. I hadn't. Turns out Dylan's visionary workflow streamlining involved recentralizing project oversight under a new committee. Him, his freelance UX guru, and 2 marketing interns with branding instincts. And that's when the real gut punch came on LinkedIn. There he was, Dylan, in all his ringlet glory, posing in front of a glass whiteboard like he just solved cancer with a mood board. His post was tagged #leadership, #AI, #innovation. The caption read, "Excited to be spearheading our company's AI rollout, an incredible journey of vision, creativity, and bold pivots. Proud of this amazing team." I wasn't tagged, not just untagged, scrubbed, like I'd never existed, like a ghost in the machine I'd built with my own sleepless nights. I didn't comment, didn't DM, didn't text. I just stared at the screen for a long, long time, and for the first time in years, I said out loud in my empty apartment, "I think they're trying to erase me." That night, I logged in late, around 1:14 a.m., when no one but the janitor bots are awake. Just needed to pull a few backups from the admin panel, safety check. I clicked the System Settings tab and got hit with a red warning box, "Access denied. You do not have administrator privileges." I just sat there. No blinking. No breathing. Cold sweat down my spine. I double-checked my credentials. Still active. Still logged in as Sara Lynn. But the system, it didn't recognize me anymore. Someone had pulled the plug. Now, here's the thing. You don't last 15 years in corporate tech without growing a second skin. You learn not to flinch. Not to scream when the knife goes in. You document, you archive, you take screenshots, timestamp your every breath, and back it up 3 different ways: cloud, local. A USB stick you hide in a ceramic tea canister labeled chamomile. So that's what I did. I spent that entire night pulling every audit trail I could still reach: emails, Slack logs, commit histories. I screen captured the API tokens I generated. The security logs showing Dylan's login from WeWork in Santa Monica, while he claimed to be coding from the cabin. The timestamped backend metrics showing the last time the AI actually worked, which, surprise, was the last build I pushed. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just preserved, like a digital embalmer preparing for a very polite funeral. By morning, HR had stopped replying to my emails. Calendar invites vanished. My security badge still got me into the building, but the front desk girl, normally all smiles and banana bread, wouldn't meet my eyes. In meetings, Dylan started referring to me in the past tense. Sara was instrumental in early development. It'd say like I died in a firmware update. But the system wasn't dead. Not yet, because every button Dylan pressed, still wired through the code I wrote. Every pipeline he redirected, still filtered through the compliance script I built. And that compliance script, that clause, required one thing before any data could be exported, licensed, or sold: a final sign-off from the primary data certifier. Me. The irony, they still needed me. Desperately. Just didn't know it yet. The email hit at 6:14 p.m. on a Thursday. That cursed hour when your brain's mush, the office fridge smells like expired hummus, and you're 2 seconds from shutting the laptop and calling it a day. Subject line, WAV AI, next chapter rocket. I clicked it. Half out of habit, half masochism. Dylan's face beamed in the header, some overexposed selfie taken in front of a neon sign that said flow state. His hair was doing that tousled chaos thing that cost $200 at barbers, who called themselves sheer architects. The email itself was a word salad of startup cliches. Bold pivot, vision realignment, external acceleration partner, and my personal favorite sometimes, true leadership means knowing when to pass the torch. Came the money shot. I've decided to step away from WAV AI to pursue a new opportunity with a partner whose expertise makes even me feel like the intern face with tears of joy. I'm out. Found someone smarter. No forwarding email. No gratitude. No mention of the $400,000 he had siphoned off the week before into a flashbang pilot demo with some vaporware firm out of Austin that literally spelled tech with 2 K-T-K-S. No apology for the mess. Just a cocky sign-off and a rocket emoji. I stared at the screen. Cold, blank, and then ping, another email. This one from HR, subject, termination of employment, immediate, no greeting, no explanation. Just a PDF attachment and a boilerplate paragraph about offboarding procedures, IT asset collection, and we wish you well in your future endeavors. A date stamp. A time. A flick of the wrist, like scraping burnt toast into the sink. I read it once, then again. Then I closed my eyes, and I breathed, that's it. Nothing poetic, no screaming, no cinematic music cue, just oxygen in, carbon dioxide out, and the strange realization that the only thing I felt was stillness. Not peace, not even rage, just stillness. Like the moment right before a storm when even the birds go quiet. I closed the laptop and sat in my dark kitchen, hands flat on the table. Somewhere, a neighbor was blasting Bon Jovi through paper-thin drywall. The ice maker hiccuped. My cat knocked over a mug. I didn't move, they'd done it. They actually did it. They fired the woman who built the skeleton of the entire product days before launch. Fired her after the budget was bled dry. Fired her, thinking the thing could walk without its spine. And Dylan, he didn't even flinch. Didn't even stay for the body to cool. He lit the fuse, snapped a selfie, and rode off on whatever hype train was dumb enough to hand him a ticket. But that's the thing about setting fires, you'd better hope the wind doesn't change. I stood up, walked to the bookshelf, pulled down an old hard drive and plugged it in. There, nested 5 folders deep, was a mirrored build of the entire WAV AI stack, clean, intact, unpoisoned by Dylan's vision. Alongside it, my documentation. The clause, one that said, all intellectual property associated with WAV AI requires certification by the primary data certifier prior to third-party engagement or commercialization. My name, my credential, my signature, my timestamp. They hadn't removed me from that role because they'd forgotten it existed, because Dylan never read the footnotes, because the CEO never asked questions that didn't come with stock photos. I booted up my terminal, started pulling logs, flagged inconsistencies in the vendor spend reports, created a timeline, a chain of custody, a narrative that, if ever questioned, would be airtight, not to expose, not yet to protect, to prepare, because I knew what came next. Chaos, scrambling, blame passing. A mad dash to salvage what was left of a project gutted by ego and glitter. And when they came crawling, and they would, I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to plead. I wasn't going to rage. I was going to choose. When, where, how. If that night I poured a glass of wine, opened a new folder labeled leverage, and got to work. One log at a time. One receipt at a time. One silent stitch in a net they didn't even know was wrapping around their ankles. Sara Lynn was gone from their org chart, but not from the system. And the system still answered to me. The board meeting kicked off at 9:00 a.m. sharp, like it always did. Stale croissants, lukewarm enthusiasm, and the kind of back-patting that could throw your shoulder out. I wasn't invited, obviously. My calendar had been scrubbed cleaner than a politician's Twitter history. But at 9:02 a.m., my phone buzzed with a private Slack message from Marcus in IT. Thought you might want this. Winking face attached was a private Zoom link. Internal only, watermarked. Real-time access to the quarterly board update. I stared at the screen for a second. I hadn't heard from Marcus since the reorg. He'd been reassigned to and for cleanup under Dylan's restructure, which basically meant sweeping up behind a guy who thought SSO was a vape brand. But Marcus was sharp. He noticed things, and he hadn't forgotten what we'd built. I clicked the link, and there he was. The CEO, perched at the head of the glass coffin they call the boardroom table, smiling like a man who just watched his kid win a spelling bee despite spelling profit with an F. We're in the final sprint, he announced, clicking to the next slide, a kaleidoscope of meaningless arrows and pastel charts. Dylan's vision sealed the deal. The client's ecstatic. They said our pilot demo was unlike anything they've seen in the enterprise space. I nearly snorted coffee through my nose. He was talking about that ridiculous WAV AI showcase, complete with ambient forest sounds, holographic charts, and some influencer-turned-consultant narrating product features like she was reading erotic poetry at a TEDx event. That demo was smoke, mirrors, and a glorified animated GIF pretending to be machine learning. And it cost the company nearly $500,000 to stage. But the board was eating it up. Some of them nodded, others scribbled notes. One of them, Cheryl from Investor Relations, uttered something about Q3 looking strong and timely leadership succession. A few even used the word genius. Genius, for Dylan. I muted the audio and just watched. Watched the man who fired me praise his son's leadership. Watched the numbers they doctored march across the screen in pixelated lies. Watched my legacy get cut into confetti and thrown into the air like it was built by the same frat boy fingers that once asked if endpoints were, quote, same as Earl's but like, different, and then it happened. Slide 19, licensing pathways. That's where things got interesting. The CEO said as long as legal finishes the final compliance check by Monday, we're ready to roll out licensing by the end of the quarter. Cue the confident smile, the subtle nod, the closing tone of a man who thought the show was over. But it wasn't, because that's when Danica from legal cleared her throat. I'm not sure that's accurate, said carefully. There's an unresolved certification flag in the IP clause, specifically regarding external transfer authorization. The room paused, just a flicker. The CEO frowned. Can't we just have CTO override? Danica shook her head. No, it's not a technical block, it's procedural. There's a compliance clause tied to the data certifier role. And per the document trail, the only named systems officer on file is she glanced down at her notes. Sara Lynn? My name echoed through the laptop speakers like a gunshot in a library. The CEO blinked. That can't be right. She's not even with us anymore. Danica folded her hands, correct. But she wasn't removed from that role. And per the compliance protocol she authored, approved by this board in last year's audit, any third-party licensing attempt triggers a mandatory certifier verification. Silence, thick, tense. One of the board members, Alan, the quiet one who usually slept through most of these, leaned in. And if she doesn't verify? Danica didn't miss a beat. Then the IP remains locked. Contractually, operationally, and in escrow. No certification, no client deployment, no revenue. My coffee never tasted sweeter. I sat back and watched the air leak out of that room like a slow puncture in a luxury SUV tire. Nobody knew what to say. Could see them mentally rewinding the last 45 minutes of self-congratulation and wondering just how badly they'd underestimated the woman they'd erased. And I said nothing. No messages, no emails, no calls. Just leaned back in my chair and let the quiet vindication settle in like warm sun through the blinds. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't invisible. I was essential. They just hadn't realized it until the walls started shaking. 3 days later, the meeting was called. Not the kind with catered muffins and motivational buzzwords. This was a closed-door, camera off, whisper at the table emergency compliance review. No flair, no filters, just legal, security, and the scent of collective oh shit in the air. They called it a routine audit, but everyone knew the truth. The contract was stalled, dead in the water. The client, some Fortune 100 beast with a procurement team trained like CIA analysts, had flagged something. Something in the license packet didn't match the compliance checklist they'd received in the earlier specs. And now, the whole rollout was iced until every I was dotted, every clause unknotted, every signature double verified. I wasn't supposed to be there, wasn't even supposed to know it was happening. But Marcus from IT had slipped me another message. Just 3 words, Clause 7.4 triggered. I almost laughed. Almost. See, Clause 7.4 was the kind of language most people skimmed right over. It lived in the shadows of the contract appendix, past the NDA, beyond the risk tables, buried under special conditions. But it was mine. I'd written it, fought for it, explained it twice to legal, and then tucked it away where only the diligent would ever notice. Clause 7.4 was a contract freeze clause, a kill switch. It stated that if any material alteration was made to the system infrastructure post-certification, particularly related to proprietary data flow or encryption handling, the contract would enter an automatic hold pending reconfirmation by the original certifying officer. That officer, Sara Lynn. They tried to remove me from the building, from the budget, from the narrative, but they'd never touched the clause, never thought to, because Dylan didn't know it existed. And the CTO, he signed it without reading, probably too distracted by the onboarding gift basket from that venture capital firm that called him forward compatible. So now legal was stuck. They combed through every compliance doc, every approval tree, every digital breadcrumb. And when they hit the certifier log, it was locked, double encrypted, time-stamped, single signature entry. One name, not Dylan. Not the CTO, not the CEO, not even legal. Just S. Lynn. That was the moment the project truly froze. See, without my signature, the licensing couldn't clear. Without the license, the client couldn't onboard. Without onboarding, there'd be no revenue recognition. No Q3 numbers. No executive bonuses. Just a whole lot of angry investors wondering why $8.4 million in development costs now looked like a cautionary tale about nepotism and unsecured ambition. I wasn't watching this part live. I didn't need to. I could feel it, like a tremor in the ground before a fault line splits. Somewhere, someone was sweating through their undershirt, trying to explain how a woman they fired by email was now the single point of failure on a multimillion-dollar deal. Me, I was folding laundry, calmly, pairing socks while power returned to me molecule by molecule. Not the desperate kind, not vengeance, just gravity. A silent recentering of the axis they'd tried to spin without me. Later that day, I got the email, not from HR, not from the CEO, not from Dylan. It was from Danica in legal. Subject, clarification request, data certification authorization. The body was polite. Measured, that they were reevaluating credential pathways and would appreciate insight into the compliance protocol. Attached was a copy of the document I'd signed 6 months ago, same clause, same timestamp, same digital watermark. I didn't respond. Not yet, because I wanted them to sit in it. Let it marinate. Let them realize the boy genius with the smoothie sponsorships had cracked open a system he didn't understand. His bold pivots had triggered the very clause designed to prevent reckless tampering. They'd handed him the keys to the kingdom. I was the lock they forgot to change. They brought out sparkling water for this one. That's how you know a meeting's meant to impress. The good conference room, 3rd floor, corner windows. One of those hideous but expensive centerpieces made of twisted metal meant to symbolize collaboration. Boards sat in their lacquered chairs like robed priests waiting for revelation. Everyone was there. Investors, legal, CTO, marketing leads, even Cheryl from PR, who hadn't been in the building since she gave a speech on optimizing brand empathy during the layoff wave. And front and center, grinning like he'd just cured corporate cancer, was the CEO. He was mid-strut, one hand in his pocket, other pointing at a slide that read Q3 expansion plan, powered by vision. His voice had that practiced boom, that cultivated cadence that said, "I've never been wrong in my life, and if I have, it was someone else's fault. And I just want to take a moment," he said, resting a hand on the podium like a preacher teeing up a resurrection, "to recognize the brilliance that brought this whole thing to life. Dylan, my son, he built this platform from scratch, a spark of an idea to a fully scalable, client-ready AI solution. We're not just launching a product, we're launching a legacy." Applause rippled, not real applause, that awkward, synchronized clapping people do when their bonus depends on it. I wasn't in the room, but I was watching, same as always. Marcus had set up a shadow stream from the AV panel. One of the perks of being the guy who resets everyone's passwords and sees all the bad search history. Then the door opened. Not dramatic, not slammed, just enough to turn heads. In walked Tom Linder from corporate counsel. The guy who never showed up unless something had gone terribly wrong or was about to. He didn't even sit down. Just walked straight to the CEO and handed him a manila folder. Old school, no digital slides, no warm-up, just paper. "Sorry to interrupt," Tom said. Calm, crisp, deadly. "But I wanted to verify something before we proceed." The CEO furrowed his brow, glanced inside, then smiled. "Ah, compliance stuff, sure." He started flipping. His lips moved silently as he read, then stopped. His jaw stiffened. Just slightly. A twitch in the temple. The kind of micro-expression you'd miss if you weren't trained to spot men realizing they've screwed up in front of their gods. Tom didn't let the silence linger, leaned just slightly toward the mic and said, "Sir, can you remind us who you fired yesterday?" The room stiffened. Not a sound. You could hear the HVAC hum, the distant thump of someone dropping a stapler 2 floors down. The CEO didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the page. Tom continued, "Because according to our internal authorization logs and the compliance agreement you personally signed last fiscal, only person with the legal ability to certify the IP package for client transfer is Sara Lynn." He let that sit. A couple of the board members turned in their seats. Someone coughed. And just to confirm, Tom added, now fully unblinking, "Sara Lynn was terminated last week." "Correct." The CEO opened his mouth, closed it. One of the investors, a guy in a cobalt suit with a jaw like a cheese grater, spoke next. "Wait, you fired the certifier?" Still, no answer. Another voice, sharp and female, cut in. "So the contract stalled because you removed the only person who could unlock it." The CEO tried to recover. He smiled. Thin, tight. Look, we were restructuring. There was confusion. Dylan had assumed operational control. Dylan? Someone echoed. The same Dylan who's not certified in compliance. The one under review for unauthorized vendor payments. Silence again. And then Cheryl, God bless her PR-trained spine, whispered the one word no one had dared say yet. Fraud. The CEO finally looked up from the folder. He looked old. Not aged, deflated. Like someone had poked a pin in the balloon animal of his career. He cleared his throat. We'll bring Sara back into the conversation. I'm sure she'll be reasonable. She's a team player. But it was too late. The damage was done. Because for all his boasts, all his hubris, all his praise of Dylan's vision, Board had seen the truth printed in black ink. Certifier, Sara Lynn. That was my name. That was my gate. And he just realized he couldn't pass through it without kneeling. The boardroom fell apart faster than Dylan's demo under a Wi-Fi drop. Tom's folder might as well have been a live grenade, pulled pin and all. The moment he confirmed that I was the only legally recognized certifier on file, the chairs started scraping back. Voices rose. Eyebrows shot up. Hands pointed across the table like someone had just confessed to burying the company's earnings in the backyard. Who holds the actual license rights? The voice belonged to Marcus Chen, investor rep for one of the firm's largest backers. He wasn't shouting, didn't need to. When guys like that raise their voice, it means millions are at risk. And this wasn't just a hiccup. This was a full system failure, one they thought they could fix with spin. Another board member, James something, real estate money, smug as a boat shoe, muttered, Wait, are we saying none of this can ship? Tom didn't sugarcoat it. Correct. As of now, there is no product, there is no legal clearance for external use. Any attempt to deliver it would be a breach of both internal protocol and the client agreement. Silence. Then the sound of a phone buzzing. Someone checked it, froze, Dylan's not answering. Another buzz. Another face goes pale. Neither is the branding firm he hired. Their sights down. Then a third. The demo links he sent to investors last month. Dead. They're showing 404s. The room spun sideways. Legal called it a possible vendor discrepancy. But everyone knew what it really was. Fraud. Dylan had funneled nearly $500,000 into a vaporware stunt with no legal sign-off, no platform stability, and no working backend. And now, he'd vanished. His corporate email bounced. His last Slack activity showed him booking a flight to Chelum. One investor stood up and said, Bring in the certifier. Now, it wasn't a request, it was damage control. And that's how I got the call. No apology, no flattery. Just a one-line message from Danica in legal. We require your presence at the 3:00 p.m. board session. Immediate compliance matter. I showed up 10 minutes early. Wearing a clean black blouse, no makeup, no jewelry, no theater. Just clarity and a small leather folder I tucked under my arm like a scalpel. I didn't walk in like a returning hero. I walked in like an audit. Silent, precise. I didn't wave, didn't smile. I made eye contact with no one except Tom from legal and the investor who'd asked who held the rights. He gave me a nod, not respect, exactly. Recognition. The look a surgeon gets before the first incision. I sat down, opened my folder. No one spoke. Then the CEO, bless him, still trying to ride the wreckage like it was a surfboard, tried to soften the blow. Sara, look, there's been some confusion. A lot of moving parts. We all appreciate your past contributions. But the current moment calls for unity. If we can just have your cooperation, I raised a hand. Calm, surgical. He stopped talking mid-sentence, like a dog that just heard a whistle only it could detect. I turned to the board. My voice was level. Even, before we proceed, I'd like to state for the record that I was terminated without cause, without exit interview, and without severance. I was removed from systems with no protocol review. And since then, this company has breached internal compliance on no less than 5 separate counts. Danica nodded slowly. The CEO cleared his throat. That's fair. Let's talk next steps. I looked at him. Really looked. No, you'll listen first. I pulled out the document. The original compliance cert, still watermarked, still time-stamped, still signed by every executive at this table. Clause 7.4, contract freeze trigger, activated by unauthorized structural change without final certifier sign-off. The clause you approved and Dylan violated. I placed it on the table, not dramatically, just enough for it to land with the right kind of weight. Everything else we say here today happens on my terms. And for the first time since this whole circus started, no one interrupted me. I wasn't the note-taker. I wasn't the support staff. I wasn't the invisible architecture holding up the house. I was the contractor with the deed, and the whole damn building was built on my signature. The emergency follow-up was scheduled for 7 o'clock a.m. sharp, not because early mornings inspire clarity, but because panic doesn't sleep. Neither do investors when $120 million in enterprise contracts hang by a fraying compliance thread. The CEO arrived 10 minutes late, hair still wet, shirt wrinkled under a blazer that had clearly been pulled off the back of his office door. His eyes scanned the room, desperate for some sign of control, some reassurance that he was still the center of gravity. He found none. The chairs were filled, yes, but the room had shifted. No more backslaps, no more fake laughs. Everyone sat straight, notebooks open, pens uncapped, like jurors waiting on a verdict. At the far end of the table, I sat alone, calm, my leather folder in front of me like a closing argument waiting to be delivered. "Thank you all for coming," Danica from legal began, her voice professional but brittle. "We're here to resolve the licensing stall that is currently preventing client onboarding and jeopardizing Q3 projections. You've confirmed the root cause is Clause 7.4 of the IP Compliance Agreement, which, per record, requires final clearance from the original data certifier." All eyes turned to me. I flipped open the folder. No flair, no dramatics, just the weight of truth in ink and paper. I slid a single page into the center of the table and read aloud, voice steady. "No system license, source code transfer. Architecture deployment may proceed externally without written and timestamp certification by the named data certifier." I looked up. Name, Sara Lynn. You could feel the oxygen drain from the room. Even the HVAC seemed to go quiet, like the building itself wanted to hear what came next. The CEO made a sound, a throat clear, or maybe a panic tick, but I raised one finger without breaking eye contact. And just like that, he shut up. Let the silence sit. Let it marinate. Let every person in that room reckon with what they'd done, not just to me, but to the system, the product, the clients they'd promised delivery timelines to while the engine was still covered in tarp and spit. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out the black security token they thought I'd mailed back, set it on the table, let it click softly against the polished wood. And then, slowly, almost lazily, I slid it back into my purse. I leaned forward just enough for my voice to drop into surgical clarity. "I'm not saying no," I said. "I'm saying, not yet." The words hit like a stone dropped into deep water. No splash, just a ripple you feel in your bones. The CEO opened his mouth again, this time more cautious, but I cut him off with a look that didn't need translation. "You signed off on my dismissal. You cut your own throat with a smile and a canned HR letter. Now you can sit there and bleed in silence." One of the board members leaned forward, voice tight. "What are your terms?" Ah, there it was. I smiled. Just enough to be unsettling. We'll get to that. After I finished reviewing the vendor contracts, internal audit logs, and a few late-night expense reports, I flagged before my access was revoked. I paused. "Oh, and I'd like written acknowledgement of the compliance breach that occurred when my credentials were deactivated." No NDA. Full transparency. Danica scribbled something. No one objected. The room wasn't just quiet, it was reverent. Like they knew they were witnessing not just a reversal, but a reordering. The ghost they tried to erase had walked through the walls, sat at their table, and taken the wheel. Not with vengeance, with control. Total, surgical, unshakable control. And in that moment, every person in that room realized the same thing. The product didn't belong to Dylan. The future didn't belong to the CEO. It belonged to the one woman they never saw coming because she never raised her voice. Only her standards. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.